Unit 7, Blood Supply. In this unit, we will talk about the arterial blood supply and venous blood supply of the brain. In the arterial blood supply, we will talk about blood supply to cerebrum, to cerebellum, and to the spinal cord. We will look at the details of circle of Willis, and we will look at the course and branches of major arteries. Let's begin with arterial blood supply. The brain is supplied by 2 internal carotid arteries and 2 vertebral arteries. Here are the internal carotid arteries, and here are the vertebral arteries. This picture shows the anterior view of the vascular system. When you look at the diagram, you have to imagine that you are observing a patient. Therefore, the left diagram represents the right side of the body. At the bottom of the page, you see the aorta. Here are the subclavian arteries on the right side and on the left side. Note that the right and left sides are not symmetrical. The right subclavian artery derives from the brachiocephalic trunk, while the left subclavian artery originates directly from the aortic arch. Here are the common carotid arteries. Internal carotid arteries are branches of the common carotid arteries. Remember that internal carotid arteries are one of the major blood supply of the brain. Here are the vertebral arteries. The vertebral artery is the other major blood supply of the brain. It is a major artery in the neck. It branches from the subclavian artery, where it arises from the posterior superior portion of the subclavian artery. On this diagram, we see the 2 major arterial blood supply of the brain. 2 internal carotid arteries and 2 vertebral arteries. This is the right lateral view of the head and neck. Again, we can see the 2 major arterial blood supply of the brain, the internal carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries. The internal carotid arteries provide arterial blood supply to the anterior 2/3 of the brain, while the vertebral arteries provide arterial blood supply to the posterior 1/3 of the brain. This video shows the anterior view of the vascular system. Again, when you look at the video, you have to imagine that you are observing a patient. Therefore, the left diagram represents the right side of the body. Let's look at the video clip. Here is the heart. Here is the ascending aorta. That's the aorta, arch of the aorta. Here is the brachiocephalic artery, and the subclavian artery on the right side is a branch of the brachiocephalic artery. On the left side, the subclavian artery is a branch of the aorta. Here are the common carotid arteries. There are 2 branches of common carotid artery, external carotid artery and internal carotid arteries. Internal carotid artery goes into the brain. is a major blood supply of the brain, which supplies the anterior 2/3 of the brain. So here is the internal carotid artery. Now, let's talk about the blood supply to cerebrum, cerebellum, and spinal cord. The three major arteries that provide blood supply to cerebrum are the anterior cerebral artery, middle cerebral artery, and posterior cerebral artery. The three major arteries that provide blood supply to cerebellum are the superior cerebellar artery, anterior inferior cerebellar artery, also called AICA, and posterior inferior cerebellar artery, also called PICA. The two major arteries that provide blood supply to the spinal cord are the anterior spinal artery and posterior spinal artery. After we talk about the blood supply to the cerebrum, cerebellum, and spinal cord, we will talk about circle of Willis. Let's begin with blood supply to cerebrum. The three major arteries that provide blood supply to cerebrum are the ACA, MCA, and PCA. ACA, anterior cerebral artery, provides blood supply to the medial surface of cerebral cortex, as far back as the parietal occipital sulcus. Neurons on the medial surface of the cortex provide motor control to the leg muscles. Therefore, ACA supplies the leg area of the brain. In addition to the medial surface of the cerebral cortex, ACA also provides blood supply to a strip of cortex about 2.5 cm wide on the lateral surface of the cortex. This picture shows the coronal section of the brain. The left side of the picture shows the coronal section of the precentral gyrus. Therefore, it shows the motor area of the cortex. The right side of the picture shows the coronal section of the postcentral gyrus. Therefore, it shows the sensory area of the cortex. The blue areas on the picture are supplied by the anterior cerebral artery, and the neurons of the blue areas control the leg and trunk muscles of the body. Therefore, the ACA provides blood supply to the leg and trunk areas. MCA, middle cerebral artery, is the largest branch of the internal carotid artery. MCA supplies the entire lateral surface of the hemisphere, except for the narrow strip supplied by ACA, the occipital lobe and inferior lateral surface of the hemisphere. MCA also provides blood supply to the basal ganglia and the internal capsule. This picture shows the lateral view of the left brain. The area in the beige or brown color is the area supplied by MCA. You can see that a large portion of the lateral cortex receives blood supply from the MCA. PCA, posterior cerebral artery, provides blood supply to the inferior lateral and medial surface of the temporal lobe, the lateral and medial surfaces of occipital lobe. It also provides blood supply to parts of thymus, basal ganglia, and midbrain. This picture shows the lateral view of the left brain. ACA provides blood supply to the pink area. MCA provides blood supply to the blue area, and PCA provides blood supply to the yellow area. This picture shows the mid-sagittal section of the right brain. ACA provides blood supply to the pink area, MCA provides blood supply to the blue area, and PCA provides blood supply to the yellow area. The three major arteries that provide blood supply to the cerebellum are the superior cerebellar artery, anterior cerebellar artery, also called AICA, and the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, also called PICA. Here is the superior cerebellar artery. Here is the anterior inferior cerebellar artery, AICA. And here is the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, PICA. Superior cerebellar artery provides arterial blood supply to the superior surface of the cerebellum, pons, pineal gland, and superior medullary velum. The AICA provides arterial blood supply to the anterior and inferior parts of the cerebellum. PICA provides arterial blood supply to the inferior surface of vermis, central nuclei of cerebellum, under surface of cerebellar hemisphere, medulla, and choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. This diagram shows the inferior surface of the brain. Here is the superior cerebellar artery. Here is the AICA, and here is the PICA. The two major arteries that provide blood supply to the spinal cord are the anterior spinal artery and the posterior spinal artery. Here is the anterior spinal artery. It provides arterial blood supply to the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord. Posterior spinal artery cannot be seen on this diagram. It provides blood supply to the posterior 1/3 of the spinal cord. The diagram on the left-hand side of the slide shows the posterior view and transverse section of the spinal cord. The diagram on the right-hand side shows the transverse section of the spinal cord. And the bottom part is the anterior spinal cord, top part is the posterior spinal cord. Here are the anterior spinal arteries, and here are the posterior spinal arteries. Both anterior spinal arteries and posterior spinal arteries are branches of the vertebral artery.